Okay. All right, so it is all live now, and we just wait for attendees to pop in. Okay. So how is everybody doing today, Mike? And you mentioned, Mike, that you were taking a walk, and I have to say, calling in from Denver, Colorado, where it is currently 0 degrees, it sounds lovely.
Yeah, well, it was cold here yesterday too. It was like mid 40s, which for us Texans, that's kind of cold. So
Right.
we cut our walk a little shorter than normal.
Yeah. Nice. And what about you, Cindy? You're in Maryland, so you're getting the weather coming towards the end of the week, right?
I'm actually in northwestern New Jersey, and we're having a warm spell today, and then snow and sleet is coming Friday.
Okay. Well, by then I'll be back outside. Mike will always be outside, and you'll be hunkered down. Okay, well, I think we are ready to get today's conversation kicked off. So I would like to officially welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kalia Garrido, and I head up events and marketing here at Great Data Minds. A little bit about GDM. We are a collective of passionate data activists, and we're on a mission to modernize the world of data. We offer a full range of services around data and analytics, strategic planning, education, the deployment of critical data projects. And then we also produce a whole bunch of great data related content and events, just like what we're here to do today. So you can always check us out at greatdataminds.com to see what we're up to next. Little bit of housekeeping. This is a webinar, so everybody's cameras and microphones are off, but of course we want to hear from you. And we'll get the chat fired up in just a second, share some resources, some links, some other events that we have coming up. So we are gathered here today to dust off our crystal balls and take a peek into the trends that will be taking center stage in this great year of 2022. And we have got the experts on board to weigh in. Allow me to first introduce our esteemed guest today. It's the one and only Cindi Howson. Cindi, thank you so much for joining us.
I was typing greetings, everyone. Thank you for having me.
We are excited. So Cindi is the Chief Data Strategy Officer at Thoughtspot and the host of the Data Chief podcast. Cindi is an analytics and BI thought leader and expert, and she has a flair for bridging the business needs with technology needs. Well, technology offerings, really, which is exactly what her company does today. And then we have our one and only Mike Lampa. He is our Chief Analytics Officer. Hi, Mike. Mike has a career's worth of experience as an executive analytics practitioner, both as a consultant and as an employee in Global 100 enterprises. And so with those introductions, Mike, I will turn the floor to you.
Well, thank you, Kalia. Cindi, how are you?
I'm great.
Good.
How are you? I had so much fun last night. I went to an Elton John concert, so I'm good. I'm rocking and rolling.
I love that.
I had a riot too. I walked.
I was like bundled up in front of the fire, guys. You're both making me jealous.
Well, let's see, Cindi. You published a great little ebook around 7 trends. Curious, what was the genesis of the 2022 7 trends?
Well, Mike, you and I have known each other for a long time. And if you go back even to my BI scorecard days, every year I would write resolutions that analytics leaders should have. I remain big on resolutions. So I think trends are interesting, but what's more important is what do you do about these trends? So I look at what are the hot topics that the CDOs, the analytics leaders that I coach are asking me about. And then I synthesize, is it hype? Is it a one-off? Is it just flavor of the month? Or is it really something, no, everyone needs to be paying attention to?
Right. Well, and based on these trends, I think we're going to find a lot of truth in that because these are really insightful. Let's get into them. So the first trend that you wrote about, and I don't know if it's necessarily the first priority, but trend number one, people analytics is rising to the top of analytic priorities.
Yeah. And this is, I mean, I follow some leaders' work in this space. So David Green, for example, wrote an excellent book that came out last year, Excellence in People Analytics, that was 4 years in the making. And I often would take people analytics or HR as an example of the forgotten child. Unless you're in professional services, this was never a top use case. Most organizations would focus on things like sales, marketing, supply chain. But guess what? Your sales, your customers are not delighted unless they are being serviced by great people. And when we have mass reshuffling or the great resignation, whatever you may want to call it, we have a pandemic. When people are working from home, they're concerned about their health. They're concerned about looking after the children, the online schooling, potentially sick parents or what have you. And their mental health is impacting their ability to focus at work. Having signs and data and insights on how people are feeling, who's feeling engaged, and making sure that you retain the best earners has to be a more important use case.
It's interesting, kind of a reinforcement there, working with Portillo's, and their leader, their HR leader, was very much geared in on the kind of analytics she needed to do to make sure that they had the right compensation analysis and the right level of engagement from across the organization. You also mentioned people analytics at Merck. Yeah.
Yeah, at Merck, actually at any company. So one of the Thoughtspot customers that speak a lot about this, and they were early. So they were already focusing on this before the pandemic, is Schneider Electric. Now think of how big this company is, 130,000 employees globally. So using data and analytics to identify the top performers and retain them has been part of their strategy for a long time. With the social protests and injustices of 2020 and onward, they were very able to quickly also analyze their diversity and inclusion metrics, whereas others, are still working on that because the data wasn't captured, wasn't readily available. They don't even know where to start. So I think I don't know an organization that is not looking at this. It's more a question of how well are they exploiting the data?
Yeah, and if there's even data to exploit.
Well, there's
Right.
definitely headcount data. Diversity and inclusion data is a little bit different because you may not be capturing some of this data. And then if you think about employee engagement, it's mining the data in employee engagement platforms and then looking at less structured data. So this might be Slack posts, meeting requests, things like this.
Yep. So what's our resolution for this first trend around people analytics?
Make it a priority and understand the context of how people drive sales, productivity, and so on. So some leaders will say people are our most important asset, but they don't actually treat them that way. And yet they really are. So recognize that. Start with the low-hanging fruit. So you're capturing payroll data, you're capturing retention data, analyze that as a first starting point. Then also look at the more qualitative employee engagement data as well. Have these act as your early warning signals for top performers who may leave. The other easy thing to look at is somebody that did an analysis identified that one of the top leading indicators for an employee to attrit is if they have not taken adequate vacation time. That data is readily available. So proactively look at that as a leading indicator.
And do we have an opportunity to get out of the box too, and look at other kinds of sources of data?
Yeah, I mean, looking at things like Glassdoor reviews, that's another source of data. Social media posts. I do think some people are more cautious on posting on social media. But if you see a decline in the positivity about a company on social media, I think that would be cause for concern.
Yeah, my sense too is leaders have an opportunity to amp their people up, give them more autonomy, right? Invest in their mastery, and make sure the company's got a purpose that they can all get behind. That everyone's like, yo, I'm into that purpose, right?
Yeah, for sure. So a purpose-driven organization is more likely to get the best talent. And, you know, in the data and analytics space, we have a tight labor market. So I think all these things are good management practices in general, but it's become more important now when there is so much churn in the workforce. I'd be curious, in your consulting practice, are you seeing a shift in these priorities? Are you seeing more use cases for people analytics?
Um, I'm not seeing a lot of it, even though we're constantly messaging, take care of you humans. It's about the humans. You can't, to your point, I loved your comment early on. Your customers aren't going to be delighted unless you have great people servicing them, right?
Yeah.
And we need to cultivate our people. You know, especially these days with so many changes. Change is so incredibly hard. So I am seeing companies starting to take a much more deliberate focus around what do I do to nurture a different culture. So
Yeah, well, so
hopefully
it all starts, yeah, it starts with culture. And I mean, so I'm only 2.5, 2 3/4 years into Thoughtspot, but why I did choose Thoughtspot was the culture of selfless excellence. That was one thing. I cannot tell you how much it meant to me. We were with a customer yesterday virtually, and she messaged me offline and said, I love the product and the people. The people mattered to me as much as the product. That's got to be a differentiator.
Absolutely. All right. So trend number one is in the bag. Take care of your people, guys and gals. Let's go to trend number two. The analytics engineer is going to displace the data scientist as the world's sexiest job.
Yes.
What?
I know. I wish I saw Tom Davenport or DJ Patel when they read that headline.
Right. So give us a hint. What do we mean by an analytics engineer?
So this is an emerging role, and there are a number of job requisitions specifically looking for the analytics engineer. They don't measure in the same number yet as the data engineer or as the data scientist, but we're seeing an increase. And where this really started was in digital natives, because they were already operating largely in the cloud ecosystem. And so the way you work in a cloud environment is different than an on-premises environment where you're limited by capacity, by compute. In the cloud, it's about all your data and the speed and agility to insight. So pulling data potentially from multiple or disparate data sources, the analytics engineers don't understand or didn't grow up in the world of OLAP cubes. Why do we even need that? Or aggregate tables. Why do we need aggregate tables? It's really about accelerating the creation of new data pipelines for the purposes of analytics, but then they don't want it to be a throwaway. So don't dump it into Excel or an Access database or whichever BI platform in-memory engine. Really create it as a repeatable process. So these are some of the skills, and there's just so many reasons why this job is important and sexier than the data scientist.
And the enabling platforms, ThoughtSpot is a classic example of enabling that self-service model and that self-service art of the possible innovation. And I want to talk a little bit about the data scientists coming out of universities.
Yeah.
They're all fired up and ready to get at it, and they walk into an environment that disillusions them a little. Yeah.
Yeah. I think both the data scientist and the business hiring them are disillusioned because they thought they would be working on cool things like machine learning algorithms.
Yeah.
And instead, they're just trying to get the data, or
Yeah,
they're having to clean the data. And then businesses are frustrated because they lack domain expertise. So this is another differentiating characteristic of the analytics engineer. They understand the domain. So maybe they know supply chain analytics or marketing analytics, but it's really about the analytics than about the coding. So I think there's been a little too much emphasis from a number of data science programs on the coding and not enough about the application of it in a real business context.
well, and the level setting too is you're not going to have pristine data, guys. Yep.
No. In fact, I kind of had an aha moment with a podcast guest. So Shu Shang from Etsy. Etsy just hired their first time CDO. And he said, the thing is, in academia, it is all about the algorithm and the algorithm bringing the improvement or the lift. And it's not about the data that feeds the algorithm. So he felt like there was also not enough emphasis placed on you've got to have clean and complete data to really have also an unbiased algorithm, but an impactful algorithm. I thought that was interesting. Now I want to go back and audit all the curriculum for certain universities. For sure, I'll do it for the one I'm on the advisory board to make sure we also are teaching people about data fundamentals. You and I know this from our time at the Data Warehousing Institute,
Right.
but it's concerning if the data scientists are not learning this.
I agree. So what's our resolution for the data engineer becoming the sexiest job, or the analytics engineer being the sexiest job in our space?
Yes, so two perspectives. If you're a hiring manager or a leader of a center of excellence, you do want to be looking at both ends of the spectrum here. Look at your data scientists who can gain these skills. Look at your current BI analysts and who can gain these skills. And so it's about reskilling and upskilling. This does require operating in a modern data platform. So you're not going to have this in an on-premises or legacy platform. So look at that full new modern stack. So if it's ingestion, you want to be looking at products like Matillion or Fivetran. For transformation, it might be dbt or Airbyte. And then for storage, Snowflake, Google BigQuery, analytics, of course, Thoughtspot. But you have to look at that full stack and recognize what are the technical skills.
Right.
If you are that professional, then it's about investing in yourself, join these communities, follow the work here, and decide what space do you want to play in.
And if we're specifically talking about more predictive analytics or machine learning based analytics, as a technology leader, take a good close look at whether a low code, no code platform is going to enable that analytics engineer.
Yes, right. So that part of the modern analytics stack, if you're looking at Data Robot or Data IQ, for example, yeah, that full stack.
All right. So let's go to trend number 3. Data mesh, data fabric, data lakehouse. They're all dethroning the data warehouse. Now, Cindy, I've been enjoying my career since 1996 in data and analytics, and I built a lot of data warehouses. I'm kind of fond of them. How are these guys displacing them?
Well, so let me ask you, Mike, how many of the data warehouses that you built in 96 are still running and still providing value?
That's a good point. I know Dell's is still running.
Okay. Okay. And
Yeah.
was it, yes, so you have this background. We might have to compare notes about that offline,
Yeah.
but so there is a fight about this
Mhm.
because I think we're coming at it from 2 angles, the technology and then the mindset and the organizations that need to support it. But there is a common thread. Businesses have to move faster.
Exactly.
And the idea of updating a data warehouse once a week and it taking 9 months, a year to ingest a new data source, is that acceptable?
I'm pretty sure it's not.
Yeah.
No, we got to be delivering every 2 weeks. Working software that's producing data products that can be consumed by analytic products. Absolutely.
Well, and you just used a word that is a key design tenet of the data mesh is data products.
Mhm.
So data as a product where it's again the end to end, either you're connecting through an API or you're extracting, creating an analyzable data set and the analytics. So, but people are scared. They're concerned. Well, what does this mean for master data? Master data, single view of a customer, single view of a product, you still need that, but it's really that there are multiple ways of architecting it, and having one centralized monolithic data warehouse is not the only answer. So there does have to be both a technology and organizational fit, organizational readiness, but the need to move faster is key.
Yeah, and I venture to say a lot of the data warehouses that lost their luster wasn't necessarily around the architecture. It was the way we tried to build them. We
Yes.
were doing, we're going to go build the enterprise data warehouse and they will come. And like you said, nine months later, I have nothing to show for it.
Yeah.
So regardless of the enabling technology, taking that incremental approach, how do I deliver value on a regular and continuous basis? Don't boil the ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the data fabrics too, we're starting to see augmented technology being embedded into these data platforms where they're using machine learning based logic. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of potential here.
Mhm. Yeah, and don't blink too long because tomorrow there's going to be something else. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. State of the
So
art keeps changing.
Mhm.
So remember when appliances were the hot thing?
Oh my gosh, yes.
So and what were we trying to do? Get
Mhm.
performance, faster query execution time without having to assemble this and create aggregate tables, partition tables, all of this. So we're trying to get to agility. We need this agility from a business imperative. Think of all the new questions that you have. 2 weeks ago, the supply chain disrupted massively from the border protests in Canada, between Canada and Michigan. Seemingly something's happening in DC this week. So you didn't have to ask this question, where do I source this product? Is there another route? The
Mhm.
way we've had to, or even as we go back to people analytics, we didn't have to ask who has taken their temperature today, who has been given new masks or what have you. Which states do we have to track vaccination rates, or which professions, things like this.
Yeah.
So many new questions, so many new data sources. We've got to find a better way. The technology enables it. It's the people mindsets that are harder to change.
Yeah, and it's going to take a while, but I will offer up that some of the research that's coming out of the likes of McKinsey, um, where they're helping people see the companies that doubled down all throughout the pandemic and really focused in around their analytic programs, they have widened this gap, and others are realizing, holy cow, I'm a laggard, and now I
Yes.
have to figure out how to catch up. Right?
Yeah. The gap between leaders and laggards only further widened in the
Yep.
last 2 years. And almost every research firm reveals that. McKinsey, Accenture, Carney. So I think for this data mesh and data fabric, the number one resolution, don't freak out. Educate yourself and don't buy the vendor speak. None of this is a single technology. It's a combination of technologies and organizational approaches. And don't, as people freak out, I've also seen some unprecedented mudslinging on these new ideas. And we can look at the origins of where these different ideas came from. ThoughtWorks, Zhamak Dehghani, the author of the Data Mesh book, but it came from a consultancy, ThoughtWorks. And I just think the debate of the approaches will get the industry to a better place if we're being open-minded. I mean, I don't know about you, but my first data warehouse project, also back in the early 90s, it was the company's second attempt. We had a failure before that. So we're going to have mistakes. It's more about the evolution based on the technology that's available and the business need.
Yep, and mistakes are actually fruits for improvement, right?
Yes,
Right.
definitely.
And one more thing before we go to the resolution. I think if people continue to focus on the data asset as a product and start figuring out, the time's going to come. I don't have the answer for it yet, but the time's going to come, Cindy, where I can port my data product to the right enabling technology, especially as new ones come up. The product stays encapsulated. I can just move it around. That's where
That would
that's
be
my vision.
lovely.
Yeah. All right. So
Wouldn't
what's
that
our
be great?
resolution? Resolution.
Oh, well, some of them I shared: education, experimentation, and agility. As you often say, as Great Data Minds often says, don't boil the ocean. Start small.
Yeah.
So think of one new use case, or think of one business question, opportunity, data product. Apply these new methods and these two new technologies to that. Create one modern data product, or I'm careful to say, are we talking data mesh or data fabric or data lakehouse? All of these come into play. Start with one use case, get the learnings from that, but educating yourself and the practitioners is key.
Absolutely key. Thank you for that. Trend number 4. Are you ready?
Yes.
Insight to action becomes a reality in the cloud
Yes.
world, right?
Yeah.
And well, you're living proof of it. ThoughtSpot's living proof of it. Right?
Who would have thought, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, we talk about that's the ideal. And as I look at the vendors that I have tracked for more than 20 years now, nobody made it readily possible. So I see this as a perfect storm of technologies coming together, definitely fueled by a cloud ecosystem, but also an open cloud ecosystem where you can connect your analytics get the insights from those analytics and actually push those insights into an action framework, whether it's send an email, send a text message, or order new products, whatever the case may be. Clearly, this would not have been possible in proprietary databases, proprietary operational systems, and just hard in an on-premises world.
Gosh, I think about my journey, the enabling capabilities of today's technology. If I could have only had that when I was a practicing data architect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the resolution to trend number 4.
Well, so again,
Is
it's
it a mindset?
predicated.
Yeah.
A lot of it, you have to be in a modern ecosystem. But
Mhm.
I think this is also where we need to look beyond just the technology and look at what are the ideal processes that the actions can be repeatable. So some actions you might be able to have with a particular algorithm that can be automated. You don't need the human in the loop.
Mhm.
That's one thing. So is your loan application approved or declined? Automate that with the algorithm. But then there's the broader bucket of when do you need the human plus the algorithm, and identify those things and look for manual processes today. So one indication of a process that would be ripe for improvement here is when somebody is taking their insights from the analytics platform and they are downloading it, say, to a spreadsheet or a document or collaboration platform, Slack or something, to take the next step. That is an indication that there's an opportunity to automate it.
Yeah. Yeah. When the insight is generating the action of pushing export to Excel.
Yeah. Why are
And
they doing that?
so actions, insights to action. I got to get that in my head, not insights for the sake of generating insight. Right.
Right, right.
Yeah. And the other thing is modernization. We don't do like, I'm going to modernize and then I'm done. We got to get
Oh,
on this continuous, it might be feel like a gerbil wheel because it's all this change that I'm going to inflict, but we have to do it. Right.
well, I try not to think of it as like a gerbil wheel because that's so demotivating. You're not making progress. I think of it as maybe hiking the 3 peaks in the Lake District in England or climbing whichever mountain. You are scaling new heights, getting a new perspective, and you are never done. You're going to keep moving on. Solve one problem today, provide new value for one workflow, and then get to the next one. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat.
Yep, I agree. Yep. And be ruthless.
Well, be ruthless, because this goes back to, I think too often organizations will say, well, we already made this particular investment and we don't want to throw it away. But you should think about what is state of the art, and state of the art keeps changing. That is a sunk cost. Past investments are sunk costs. Did you get your ROI on that? And if I can recommend, I think you know this thought leader as well, Bill Schmarzo. In his book, he has a good economic value assessment for when you should be looking at something as a sunk cost. Sometimes retrofitting, well, most often retrofitting legacy technology, trying to apply something new in a legacy technology is going to be more expensive.
And that kind of goes back to, but I know this technology, right?
Comfort, yeah.
It's near and dear to me. Don't take it out of my hands.
Yeah, this is
Brenda?
so another quote from the Data Chief podcast, the CDO of Quantum Health partners, John Osborne, something to the effect, it's easier to change 25-year-old technology than it is to change 25-year-old mindsets.
Haha, classic. I love that.
Yes. Yeah.
I hope Julie Burrows is taking notes on this stuff. These are great quotes. All right, let's go to trend number 5. Um, data sharing goes from competitive advantage to essential.
Yes. Yeah. And
Uh-huh.
this is really an evolution from, or a refinement, a progression from the trend that I wrote in 2021, that I predicted that companies that leveraged external data and data sharing would outperform their competitors by double digits. And it was validating to me that then after I published that, I saw similar predictions both from IDC and Gartner, and that did play out in 2021. So this is, again, a case of a potential winner take all, as businesses really create ecosystems across the full value chain of that data sharing. I'd like to know, how much are you seeing this?
Well, I am seeing a lot of that. Another phrase that kind of comes to mind is data democratization. Can't even get the word out. Actually, working on with a client right now that's exactly what they want to do, is they want to democratize and monetize their data. Right? So there's intrinsic value there. The other thing is, you mentioned this earlier, bringing in this external data gives me so much more insight as to the context of the markets that I'm competing in. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I think of it in these segments. So you use the word data monetization. Some people use that broadly, really for any kind of value enhancement. I use it more narrowly when you're selling your data.
Exactly. Yep.
And so I do think that's one thing. Then using that external data to better know the customer, for example, or to look for early leading indicators, I think is also key. And then the third thing is it's much earlier days, again, because the technology is also new. So data privacy agreements, data sharing agreements, it's early days for this, but sharing the data across the whole value chain. So one of my favorite ones that I hope we'll get here is, if you think about healthcare, think about from, let's say, a pharmaceutical company to then a healthcare provider, the patient, and the payer. And right now that data is so siloed, but if maybe the payer could see, oh, my aunt did not fulfill her prescription this month, is she okay? We might have a health incident, and look across that whole value chain. Then we really get to patient outcomes at a much lower cost. There's a lot of other use cases, but I get excited about this one.
There's a purpose statement right there.
Yes,
Improving patient
definitely.
outcomes, right?
Yeah.
All right, so give me a resolution here. What do we need to do around not becoming even further back as a laggard because I'm not doing the essential?
Yeah. And so you mentioned the external data. And I do think the first thing a CDO is should get that external data under their purview, where not every department is going off and buying all these data sources and potentially duplicating the buying. Once that's under their purview, look at modernizing the way that data flows. So I love the quote from a leader at Hulu that the modern data sharing approaches, that really Snowflake was first to market with these capabilities, it's the end of FTP as we know it.
Yep.
And so modernize that data pipeline, I think, is good. The next thing would be, we need a heavy dose of imagination here.
Yep.
Because I think we just think, oh, what data do we have in our transaction system? Let's put it in a data platform so we can analyze it. Can we make use of it? Start with the business question, the business problem you're trying to solve. Use your imagination. If I could see this, or if I could know this, what would it tell me about, let's say, consumers? So newer data sources like human mobility, this was not a data source before. And now with our digital movements on our cell phones, this data is available. And that can be very useful to a retailer where they locate goods, things like this. So start with a business question, use your imagination to brainstorm what data can you bring to bear. Is that enough resolutions?
I think that's a good set of evolutions. I'll throw in there too, exercise that memory muscle, continuous innovation. Right?
Yeah.
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 Don't settle for the status quo. Number 6, environmental, social, and governance data. Data for the good. I've been seeing a lot of publications around ESG.
Yeah.
Tell me a
It's
little bit about
interesting,
that.
isn't it? It's so, I would say it started kind of more from the investment community,
Mhm.
looking at which companies have good ESG performance here. And then it's become also a deal with, let's say, employees, a pact with your employees. But then to be able to report on performance, you have to collect it.
Exactly.
And then that's hard.
That is,
That-
well, yeah.
That's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, when I first saw it, I was like, where am I going to get that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had to get creative. I was pretty surprised when I read one article about it's becoming a very important influence on valuations of companies.
Yes, it is. It is. And I think, you look at all the different elements, you could break it down. Just take environmental things like smart buildings come into play here, because what is your CO2 if you're working in a building in Florida where they keep, the thermostat at 68 degrees in the summer. So half of us are chilly, the rest of us are comfortable, and they run that all night long. That's not good. When I was traveling in Japan, I remember it was their summer months, and because they have a mandate to lower their CO2 emissions, they talk about business casual. I thought it was a dress code. It was not. It was that they kept the thermostats very, very warm by American standards. And yet it was really about using energy more efficiently. Smart buildings allow better tracking of this. But I was reading about one company, many employees, they were trying to count the number of toilet paper rolls because the degree of waste that creates. That's hard. So some of this data is hard to get to. I think certain other data sets, like if we think of social, we think about diversity and inclusion data, efforts from groups like the Bloomberg Equality Index make it a little easier because they at least are setting the standards. But I think this is a tough new data area for many organizations.
Yes, it is. And governance, I think people need to realize, well, governance as a whole is getting a big resurgence, and it's around the data, proper, you know, stewardship of the data. But I'm also seeing a big push around the ethical use of the data, including, are those machine learning models ethical? They might be
Yes.
legal, but are they ethical? Yeah.
Yeah. So just because you can, should you?
Mhm.
One of the things that we've started doing as an extension of the Data Chief podcast is we now do, actually, you were a pioneer on the
I
first
was.
episode of the Data Chief Live.
I
So
was.
our monthly one-to-many coaching sessions. And this month in February, we took the topic of AI ethics and how can you be more proactive. And I'll tell you, Mike, I was really surprised by the low number of companies that are proactive about having review boards or monitoring data sets for biases. And I just think this is waiting for something bad to happen in company brand tarnishing, or worse is some group being accidentally marginalized by an unintended outcome from a machine learning algorithm.
Yep. And that data observability kind of comes into play to me too. It's like the
Yeah.
continuous monitoring.
Yeah.
All right. So one resolution that you kind of played out then is embrace and then implement the significance of ESG data in your company's culture and DNA. Right?
Yeah. And I think it's, start small, start with at least, I think companies do a lot of things, but they may not necessarily track it or communicate it well. So start by pulling these different efforts together so that there's visibility across the organization. What are the efforts? And start with the easy data. Come back to the hard data as a second pass.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Trend number 7. Our last trend for 2022 from Cindi Howson. Power returns to the people in the battle for personal data. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. The maybe is the big thing. The maybe is the big thing, sadly. Yeah, and it's funny, I try to keep these to 6, but then when I get to the 7th, I'm like, oh, why did I put that in there? It's hard. But this is we are early days here.
Mhm.
And if you think, go back pre-internet, pre-digital everything. And what was the worst thing that happened with our data? Our names wound up on all these mailing lists and we got too much junk mail.
Right.
Now the level of visibility that third-party organizations have in terms of where we shop, what we look at, what they hear from our communication devices, it's a lot more. And research from the Pew Foundation found that 7 out of 10 people are very concerned about the level of data being captured about them. Now people don't mind providing the data if it benefits them. So I'll give you my data if you're going to improve my healthcare, or if you're going to give me that great discount at my favorite store and maybe recommend a hot selling item before it goes out of stock. But this same survey from the Pew Foundation found that less than a third actually feel that they get any benefit from providing this data. That's a pretty big indictment on how the personal data is benefiting the person. It seems to be more benefiting the companies, and we have to fix that.
And that goes back to the ethics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a shame. I've been freaked out a couple times. Most recently, I'm beginning to think this thing is listening all the time because I'm getting ads in the morning based on a conversation I had the evening before. And it was a
Yeah.
one-on-one conversation with another individual in my home. So
Yeah.
something's going on there.
Yeah.
So what's my
yeah.
resolution?
Well, and keep in mind, I wrote this in December. And so you put it out there and then you see, will it play out?
Mhm.
This past weekend, the Wall Street Journal had now some really good data as Apple gave people more power over their data. So now you could say, I do not want to be tracked, and you have to opt in. Only 18% opted in
Huh.
for the tracking. So this is the power back to the individual.
Mhm.
And it's estimated to have, I think they said a 10 billion hit in revenues for Facebook advertising this year, because now people that used to heavily spend their marketing dollars on Facebook ads, it's not reaching the desired people. So I do think this gives power back to the people. If you as a company are providing benefit, that's got to be your number one thing. There has to be a benefit to the person. There has to be trust. If those two things are there, then individuals are willing to share data. So this is a formula. For example, Daily Harvest, Stitch Fix, these are brands that provide personalized recommendations to their consumers based on a lot of data that they give. So they're not reselling that data because they know that opting in improves the direct experience.
Right. So build your own first party
Build your own
data.
first party data. Yeah. And this is where, so for some organizations that's hard, like CPG companies. But if you look at
Right.
Kraft Heinz, they provide recipes for as a way of getting first party data, because they may not be able to see anymore that I'm shopping for some product, maybe that macaroni and cheese
Favorite.
on Facebook or what have you. Yeah.
All right. So those are 7 trends and the resolutions. And I will offer up to everybody on the call, check out Cindy's ebook. It's really well written, incredibly insightful. And for me, it was very valuable. I took some bits from it and started adding it into our practice. So I appreciate that, Cindy. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. I feel like I should ask you, is there one that most surprised you or one that you disagreed with?
I didn't disagree with any of them. Let me go back through. I should have asterisked which one. The analytics engineer was probably the most, was like, oh, what is that? Because we're promoting leverage these low code, no code tools and groom your citizen data scientists. But that has kind of a common connotation that doesn't sit well. So when I saw analytics engineer, I was like, oh, is that actually a career path now? So that was
Yeah.
my surprise.
Okay, good.
And I'm sticking
Thanks for
to
sharing that.
it. So thank you so much, Cindy. Kalia, do we have any calls to action?
We do indeed, yes. And
Oh,
we have
look at that.
Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Julie. How are
How are
you?
you? Great,
you?
great. Just sitting here listening to you. I had a couple questions.
Fire away.
All right. So, we have the passion for the humans because we do so many projects where, the breakdown in success is the humans, right? So I loved how you talk about educating the humans, but yet we sit here and I feel like I'm a broken record. And then we come back a few months later and we say, have you thought about our educational suggestions? And they're like, well, people do not spend money on education for their people. And that is the number one thing you can do. Do you have a recommendation on how to get these folks to start spending money on education?
I'm going to have to ask you, or maybe push back. Do they not spend money on their employees, or do the employees not prioritize their own learning? Because I can even tell you, Thoughtspot has a learning benefit. You know what? Even at Gartner, we had learning benefit. When I was at Gartner, I never took advantage of it. And so I think we have to prioritize in our own careers and our own ongoing learning. And I think many organizations provide these benefits, but it's hard, especially in the data and analytics space, for us to find time to reskill and upskill. I have not heard, maybe in the public sector, I've had some customers say, I was not approved to go to this conference, and they might have paid for themselves as part of their learning. But I don't think I've ever heard somebody in the private sector say, no, my attendance wasn't approved. There's no learning budget.
Yeah. So
I've got
I
a,
disagree.
I've got an idea too around that, Julia. Is I'm wondering if companies would start measuring the shift in performance of individuals pre and post education, they would start to see that, oh, there's a cause and effect here.
Yeah.
If I
Yeah.
invest in mastery, I get better product.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is, yes, I agree with you, Cindy, that we should all be, going to cooking classes, just kidding, but educating ourselves in the data and analytics space. True. And especially those that are on the, the technical side, there's so much to learn. Things are changing so rapidly. But I also don't think that these companies take time to set aside, like we always promote live education, whether it's virtual with global teams, you almost have to make it virtual and or on site. And it's a mandate that you come, but you don't see that. You do not see the investment in that type of training. So we do see, go sit in the corner and take a cloud Coursera course on GCP. We see that a lot. And,
yeah.
Right. But
Not the same.
Yeah, we even promote education for like executives. Like, why do you need to be data driven? Rarely do we see people going, oh, yeah, get in here and do that, so people just don't spend money on education with their people.
Yeah. And I think, listen, the online courses, I did an online course last year. That's a different experience. And we're so grateful for them for the scale that they offer, the low cost, and in this pandemic world that they were available. But I think debating something with somebody else, it provides reinforcement. And I think that's got to be part of the learning component. I was talking to a customer the other day who said his favorite learning mechanism is conferences. So maybe it's not just one silver bullet, it's having multiple approaches to self-learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got to get hybrid and everything, right?
Yeah.
But there is something incredibly powerful about having that group in front of you, and the promotion of interaction is so much easier, not only between you as the educator and the participants, but when the participants start cross collaborating during the class, that was always the most rewarding, I thought.
Definitely.
And Cindy, I have one more question. I have a call in 2 minutes with a CDO that I might be able to send your way for your program. Are you seeing more women out there? I am. When I get on these calls, I know that you really focus on helping women, but we're seeing more and more the percentages are changing.
Yeah, I think in the leadership level, I think we are seeing more diversity of data and analytics leaders. I think at the entry levels, I can't say. I'd have to look at the data. But what I am seeing is more groups that are supporting these and more male allies. So the groups that I love, WILDA, WLDA, Women in Data. I know Great Data Minds has their chapter as well. Women in Analytics, all really excellent groups. And again, not just for women, it's for male allies. So what these women also need is mentoring. If a male ally is feeling intimidated by all of this push for women in our field, be a mentor. Tell us what we can do better, or help us find our voices, help us find the next job. Help us negotiate a better pay, because you're better at that than we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
be a man,
speaking
be a
for
man
myself.
about it, right? Be a
Cindy,
man
I
about it and
love,
take
I
care of
love it when
everyone.
you come on. I know Mike does too. He was really
Yeah.
excited about this. And
Yeah.
Kaylee, I heard too. Thank you so much. I'm going to leave at this point. I'm going to leave it to you guys. Good to see you.
Good to see you, and
Julie.
thank you to Great Data Minds. Yeah.
No,
Okay, yeah,
I
we
love it.
have one more question just before we close out the session, and this is coming in from Francesco, and he says, what will and should disappear from the modern data stack? You mentioned aggregates and OLAP cubes. What else?
Well, ETL, it should be ELT as well.
Yep.
So, going back to the days of, don't load that much data because we're going to hit our capacity limits.
I agree with that. The other thing that I think needs to start more is that embedded data observability across.
So what will
the
be
whole-
added? Yeah, he was asking what else goes away. Yeah, data
Right.
observability, I think, key category.
Mhm.
All right.
Cindy, what a pleasure.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Cindy, for being here. This is a great conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye,
All right,
everybody.
See you later.
Have a
Bye.
great day.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.